Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thank you for coming along our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Jan Vermouth, and joining me as always, my two co-hosts, Jonathan Edwards and Scott Burleson. This time, we're going to try something a little different. There's no guest, and we're going to take a philosophical perspective on jobs to be done. Some listeners will know that philosophy is quite dear to my heart and something that I've brought up here and there in the podcast. So today we want to make these comments or hints front and center and really take a philosophical view on jobs to be done. It's also worth noting that Scott in his book, Statue in the Stone, was basically the one that first connected us and jobs to be done and philosophy. And it's the very reason I think we three found each other and started this whole adventure of the Product Quest podcast. So I think it's only fair to start with you, Scott. Scott, how did you or why did you bring kind of jobs to be done and philosophy together?
Well, it's a good question. I'll start with this. I never had the main reason for writing the book was really to better understand jobs to be done myself. So we start there. And then the next thing was I had no desire to add anything to it. I just wanted to understand it. Okay. So anytime I added something or whatever, it was for my own use. It was like I felt like something needed to be there for myself. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. So when I first read What Customers Want from Tony Owek, and so this was, I had read some Clayton Christensen. Well, let me back up even further. I'd read Clayton Christensen, milkshake marketing, all that, which I found was like super interesting, but I didn't really know what to do. I didn't what do I do tomorrow? What do I, so I'm a product manager trying to do tractors. It's just like, I didn't really know what to do with it. Much less, how do I use it to work with other people and help them to use it better? So it was really just an idea.
Yeah.
And that was, and Christensen and Tony Owek both described it as jobs to be done theory. That always sounded a little odd. But that, hey, that's the space. But anyway, so when I read What Customers Want, it was very much a process. Here's step one, here's step two, here's what you do within each step. Now I know what to do. Now I know actions I can take. And so that really, without thinking about it a whole lot, that's what sort of got me to jump off the cliff, go deep in executing this process. But even as I was doing that, at the time, I'm thinking, this is more than a process. It's like it's a process, yes, innovation process, but it's also a mindset, a way of thinking, and the mindset and way of thinking have value, completely separate from the process. Like you could execute the process and you need the mindset to execute the process, but you could use the mindset and thinking to a productive end without using the process. So it was like, there's like these two separate things that sort of interact, but they're not, it's more than just a process.
I really like this. So you're positioning between an idea and a process, or even a kind of, even more than just these two things.
Yeah, it's like together, it's more than that. But I was not super introspective about it at the time because I didn't need to be. I was just Actually, I was less than a practitioner. I was a person who hired practitioners, but I very soon became one. But I still didn't need to wrestle with what it is because I didn't really have to explain it to anybody else. Other than in the simplest of terms, a customer hires a part to accomplish a job. Wow, does that sound smart? And I did that. I explained that to a lot of people. In fact, I'll share this. Within John Deere, I made my own little presentation. And by the way, I can't emphasize enough how out of my character this was for me to do. What I did was I created my own little presentation on outcome-driven innovation, really, which is Tony Owek's applied jobs to be done. And I set up appointments with executives all throughout the building. And I literally went door to door like a salesman or a itinerant preacher with my slide deck. And I would lay it out on the table and I'd flip the pages and I'd answer their questions and we'd go through it. But the remarkable thing about that is that how out of my character that is to do. I would be more comfortable with the engineers and other product managers. I'm not somebody that sought an audience. I'm not somebody that sought, hey, I really am passionate about this change. But I was passionate. I was so passionate about jobs we've done. I love talking about it so much that it sort of I sort of found myself exhibiting behaviors that as an introvert wasn't necessarily the most natural thing for me to do. But anyway, I always found it a little strange that it was called jobs to be done theory.
Yeah.
And because to me, I think of the word theory in a couple different ways. One is, okay, a theory is like an idea that I might prove or disprove, or maybe that's too simplistic. A theory that I might gather evidence to help make the case for. Yeah. So I get up every day and I see the sun go across the sky. Okay, so I have a theory that the earth is at the center and the sun goes around the earth, and I could gather, but it's a theory. And somebody else, then Jan and Jonathan, you guys have another theory. You say the earth goes around the sun, and then so we sort of have these different theories. It's almost a hypothesis, and then we gather. And so in that sense, the word theory is not very helpful. That doesn't describe this jobs we've done at all. I don't think. Like, is it something we're trying to prove or gather evidence for? That I didn't really get that. And I guess the other use of the word theory is as in theoretical. So like theoretical physics, or which to me implies something you do on paper. Where theoretically,
it's just theoretically,
if I jump out of a plane, my acceleration rate to the ground is this. But in practice, there's whatever wind currents and other crazy things. So it's sort of like it's separated from what's practical. And that didn't make sense to me either, because it's very practical. If it's not, it's jobs we've done to me was very practical. It's something to help you get something done. But I didn't care about all that. I didn't care about it until at some point I did start to write a book. And then I found myself caring about these words very much. Yeah. And so with the purpose of the book was to understand the writing of the book was to understand jobs we've done better. And so I would run across things where how something was used in practice, I didn't feel like it fit. And describing jobs we've done as a theory, which most of the top practitioners, the top thought leaders in the world, that's still what they do. It didn't seem to fit for me. So the word philosophy, so I'm searching for a word, right? I'm searching for something to contain it. And so in the word philosophy, which actually I just learned today and sort of preparing for this, means love of wisdom. I'd love to say that I knew that was the inspiration at the time, but that would be a bit of a
that would have been your opportunity now. It's just
that would be a bit of revisionist history. So I'm gonna keep all that completely honest about that. But so at the time, the word philosophy, I knew this much, like from Aristotle, that the original philosophers were trying to do something practical and useful. Or at least that was my belief. They were trying to understand the world and document it in a way that could be used, not just to talk about. Now, again, you have a PhD in philosophy, so it's intimidating for me as I'm describing this. It's like, wow, I could be saying the dumbest things ever. So so what I'm saying might not even be right. It's just, this was just my logic.
Well, you can have a PhD and still say dumb things. So I guarantee you that's possible.
Fair enough. But it'd be like talking about a surgery to a surgeon. I'm stepping into your area of expertise. But I knew this much, that the original use of the word philosophy was to be practical and useful. That was at least my belief. And so I felt like the word philosophy could include this mindset, could include aspects of a process. It was something that could house it all together. Okay. And I think I got a little bit lucky, to be honest, because the more I've read about really the word philosophy, the more it fits. it could have been I chose it, and then years later I thought of some reason. But the more I understand what's meant by that love of wisdom, the more it seems like it fits to me. But the initial the initial annoyance that made me think, what should another word be, was that I did not feel that Jobs he done theory. I thought that was, and that Christensen, that's his phrasing, but I always felt that it didn't work for me. It didn't fit my reality. So that was the initial reason that I even thought to come up with the word.
That's nice. I really like your emphasis because well, there is, or there has been, I think times are changing in this respect, but the word philosophy also carries some kind of baggage, where exactly this, well, it's just a philosophy, or kind of, well, it's something you do kind of Friday afternoon with a glass of wine kind of thing. So that's, and then we talk about philosophical stuff. It doesn't really matter. So that's why I really liked how you phrase this. It has these kind of, it encompasses practical and theoretical in a certain sense, or in a more interesting way than just being one of the two. And I had a similar experience where I just think it's some thoughts or some ideas are just kind of, they start to spread into all different kinds of things. And having a philosophy, I think, is exactly that. You start from a couple of things that you assume, and it spreads into different areas of your life. And I feel like Jobs to be done has, or at least had that impact in my view or my experience. It started out as something that was mentioned in my job, and then you kind of end up thinking about much more things from the same basic principles. And I think so that's why I really loved it when you started to connect those two. So I don't, Jonathan, had you had a similar experience, or how do you see that?
Well, yes, I mean, my experience was very practical at first. I came to it through, in my company that I had at the time, I was doing communication for companies, and I quickly realized that the most crucial and important task was to understand what a company was doing and what their value proposition was. And I recall very clearly thinking, this is really a place where if we do something, if we do this very efficiently and get the information out very efficiently, it would really improve the way we work. And in addition, it will allow us to expand, scale up, and work with partners with whom we could communicate better. And I remember thinking, okay, I've got 2 weeks where I didn't really have a project in summer, and I thought, okay, I've got kind of an idea of how this might look, and I had this kind of vision of some kind of tree or graph or something where I could basically do an interview with a client. And I really knew nothing about interviewing clients or design or anything at that time. It was just this vision I had, where I would be able to take elements of what our clients would say about their business and basically be able to put them in kind of boxes, and that would be kind of a backbone of our strategy going forward with this client. And I remember very clearly thinking, okay, I've got kind of an idea. I think really, like, in a few days I'll just do this, and we have this written down. And I quickly searched online for things like, okay, so what are the important categories, what are the important boxes I need to fill? And I was thinking, okay, so, I had these buzz sentences in my mind, such as, features don't sell, but benefits sell, or something to that effect. So I thought, okay, so what's a benefit? And I started looking into that, and I found all sorts of stuff online, and nothing really clicked. And then I thought, okay, I need to think about this myself. And I started applying. I mean, having studied physics myself, I'm trained in that way. So I started applying these kinds of ways of looking at things with, okay, we have different states, and these states evolve. And so I kind of looked at that kind of stuff. And so I started building this, and obviously, needless to say, I never figured it out in that space of 2 weeks. It was much more work than I initially thought.
Yeah.
And I just started reading different books, and one of the books I read was the value proposition design. I forget the exact title of Osterwalder. And I was a bit frustrated because I tried using it a bit on some of our projects. I was doing examples for myself as I was going through this process. And I was already asking, okay, what's a pain and a gain? Okay, it all makes sense. But when I actually tried to use it, I wasn't able to really place things in a convincing way. It seemed a bit ad hoc, and I was a bit frustrated with the definitions. Let's put it this way. I wasn't quite sure how to use this, and I saw there was for people who may recall this canvas has two sides to it. And on the offer side, you have the pains, the gains, and it was written job. And I thought, oh, that's fine. What's this job? And I think there was a little kind of note at the bottom saying, referencing Tony Ulwick's book. Yeah. And so I thought, oh, what is that job? So I went to look into it. And that's how I got to Tony's work and reading what customers want. And for me, it was immediately quite clear that this was very philosophical as a topic. And maybe this is something we'll touch upon in our discussion, but for me, let's say the ontological aspects were very important. That's how I started, because I wanted to put make these different boxes, which is a form of ontology. And that's how I got into it. And I've been trying to figure this out now for some while, and still going.
Okay, so I think that's great. We'll touch upon a couple of things there. I had kind of also an immediate connection with jobs to be done and philosophy that we'll touch upon once we get to Aristotle and all that kind of stuff. But so I'll have to talk a little bit kind of and explore what maybe a philosophical perspective on jobs to be done could be. And what I want to do is reconstruct jobs to be done as an argument. So philosophy is very often about arguments and if they're sound, and then you kind of, are the premises right and all that kind of stuff. And I think it makes it easier for our discussion kind of to have something like, okay, what's the argument that the jobs to be done is all about? What does it propose? So I'll try to kind of or present it as an argument. So it argues for a certain position. And I think that argument has to do with the adoption of solutions. So it's jobs to be, you don't have to do it this way, but and Scott, you do it differently. But I think I want to try to show how it actually connects to different things, such that it is an argument for a certain kind of being able to predict adoption. Now that sounds a little bit abstract, but I think once we get into the argumentation itself, and probably it's helpful if we put it in the description of the things that I can read it. So I'll present it as an argument, and then we dive into its components. So that will be how we're going to go about this. Okay,
so you just stepped into your classroom, Dr. Vermouth. I'm ready, ready to go. Ready up front. Please got my note. I'm ready to take notes. Let's go.
Oh my God. So this makes me say one thing. So philosophy, everything is debated. And I honestly mean that everything is debated, and that's what I like about it. So there's very little that we actually agree upon, and I think that's why I stick with it. Maybe we all agree that Socrates was a philosopher, but all the rest is up for debate. And I mean everything. So, okay. Buddy. So here it goes. So the core argument of jobs to be done. So I think the first kind of assumption, or the first assumption is this one, of the first premise, if you like, is human beings want to achieve certain things. And within jobs to be done, we call these things a job. So human beings want to achieve certain things, call these things a job. To achieve them, so to achieve a job, they use different means, and different means can allow them to achieve the same job. Now, call these things that allow them to achieve the job solutions. That's what we would call a solution. This is just what I'm doing now and you touched upon this, Jonathan, is just kind of putting labels onto things, or that's basically what ontology is. What things are there? So there is a job. That's the thing that human beings wants to achieve. Then there is means, or different means, that allow them to achieve the job. And we call this a solution. We can always debate about the word, but we call this a solution. Now, some of those solutions are better, some are worse. We decide and judge which are worse and which are better, depending on how well these solutions help us get the job done. So in relationship to how well they allow us to achieve the job, we judge how well the solutions are. I will call this the utility of a solution. That's maybe not a good word, but I'll call this a utility of a solution. That's usually not used in jobs to be done. But okay, kind of the adaptness of a solution to achieve a certain jobs, I will call the utility of a solution. Now, for us, for humans, to use new solutions, so to introduce new solutions to achieve the job, the solutions must significantly improve getting the job done compared to how we get it done now. So this is where I kind of starting to sneak in innovation and adoption. So I'm making a difference between the way the job is achieved now and how new solutions are introduced in that kind of ecosystem of things that we already use. That only if the new solution is really significantly better at getting the job done, will there be something like adoption of a new solution. Now I think it gets even a little bit more spicier. So there is a way, or jobs to be done claims, there is a way to know, even maybe predict, and we can debate about this, but there's a way to know, even predict, if a new solution does get the job done significantly better or not. This depends on how well the solution performs against the set of criteria that we use to evaluate the utility of a new solution. So there is a way to know if solution is good or bad in very simple terms. The way to know this is measuring the solution against a set of criteria. And these criteria describe the utility or evaluate the utility of a solution. Now, ODI, for example, calls these outcomes. We call these job metrics. I think Christensen calls these success metrics or something. I'm not 100% sure. But these are the criteria that we use to evaluate the utility of a solution. And based on this, we know whether or not a new solution can get the job done significantly better or not. Now, again, we added a level of complexity. That's the next assumption. We human beings, we can express and know all our outcomes. Like that is something that we get in. So I think jobs to be done does claim that customers are able to fully express how they evaluate solutions and how they evaluate the performance of a solution. Now, if a new solution allows us to get the job done significantly better, which means performs better measured by the outcomes, we are much more likely to adopt it. So here I'm basically connecting the performance or the utility of a solution with getting a job done and adoption. So adoption occurs if, and only if you like, the solution gets the job done significantly better. And that we know by the criteria, which we call outcomes or job metrics. Now, therefore, and that's kind of the conclusion or the why I think it argues for an adoption. Therefore, with jobs to be done, it is possible to know if a new solution will be adopted to get a job done. And I think that is kind of a very strong claim, if you like, or a very bold claim, that the jobs to be done philosophy gives you a way to predict adoption. That's how I would reconstruct it.
Very nice. Again,
yeah, no, go on.
No, I think you've laid it out really nicely. And I think you've touched upon all the, I don't see anything else to add there. The last statement, and so the fact that it's possible to know if a new solution will be adopted to get a job done. I'm wondering, I mean, we're in terms of innovation, we obviously also want to create. So how would you think that fits in that list? So, because for me, jobs to be done doesn't really tell us anything about how we can necessarily create the solution. So there's always this gap between laying out what you've laid out here and actually creating the solution.
Yeah, I think you're right. So do I understand your question correctly? Like, is jobs to be done also something that has a kind of claim about what a good solution or how to go about inventing good solutions?
Well, I actually don't think it does really have a claim. I think it provides a necessary component of creating a valuable solution, but I don't think it says anything about how to go about creating the solution. It narrows the space, but there is this gap between, I mean, this is also one of the maybe underlying tenets, which through the lines we can guess here, is this idea that there's a separation between the problems and the solutions.
So I think I would agree that there is, I mean, JobsDone is very strongly on kind of the, if you like, the problem side and not on the solution. I think, however, what is nice about JobsDone is it actually tells you what a solution is. It doesn't just equate it with, well, it's technology or whatever. So there is a notion of what it means for something to be a solution. And I think that is already helpful in its own right, because a lot of times solution we just equated with whatever we can create. And I don't think whatever we can create is a solution. So we gotten used in innovation to talk about, well, there's problem and solution, or problem market, or problem whatever fit. And I think JobsDone has there a very strict idea of what a solution is, and kind of what is a problem, or what is it that the thing is a solution for. So, and I think that is already really helpful. But I completely agree. I think it doesn't. There is no prescription about how to go about creating solutions. It tells you where good solutions make sense, or new solutions make sense, or how you would evaluate a new solution. But I don't think there is anything in there that helps you create or come up with the good idea. I don't know how you see this, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, the limitations of it is how would I put this? Well, when working with companies, and they often don't want to hear the limitations of it, which I am quite.
Well, there is a selling side to it, and then there is
well, there is, but it's like, it's not going to tell you what technologies are going to emerge, because who knows what, because it's unknown. Some things are unknowable, practically speaking. I mean, maybe, if you're literally, I'll come back to that unknowable. I think part of the reason it's unknowable is you don't really know how technologies are going to combine with each other. And I just think it's unknowable. And so it doesn't help you know something that's unknowable. Right.
Yeah.
But maybe it's because those of us, the jobs who've done space, maybe we don't explain the limitations well enough, because we're trying to make a living and sell our wares, if you will. But when companies sort of realize that, it's not going to, because they want to say, well, interview these customers, well, this is a very real situation, but interview these customers and essentially, what technologies are going to emerge and going to win?
Yeah.
And I'm like, they don't know. They don't know. I can get that information. I can put in a nice report, but I don't know how to explain this to you. They do not have that information. You know who has it? Nobody has it. That's who. And so from that perspective, I mean, it's not something to be ashamed of, because it's unknowable. But and again, I can back up and say that's just my position, that it's unknowable. Maybe it's just because it's not my area of expertise, but that's sort of my personal position. Certainly, history is full of incredibly knowledgeable experts making terrible predictions.
Yes.
Like the CEO of Microsoft, like in 2006, I think, something like that. I could be off. It was like the iPhone's a fad, I mean, that's just one. It's not the only example. So maybe I'll beat up on. Oh, I guess I'm beating up on Microsoft twice, but because Bill Gates, I don't remember the number, but he said, like in the early 80s, he said I don't remember the number, but the maximum amount of memory anybody ever needs was 32K or some crazy small. But there's lots of those stories, and we like to tell them. And I like to tell them not to embarrass the people. Well, maybe not to embarrass the people, but there's a moral there. that no matter how much knowledge we have, when it comes to the solution part of it, we should keep our ears open. We, just keep up with what's evolving, but you're not going to interview customers and they're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
And again, I don't usually say they can't tell you. What I say is they're reliable or unreliable. So they're reliable about what their problems are. They're reliable about what they're experienced. They're reliable about what they're interested in. They are not reliable about what technologies are going to emerge. And so, but having said that, jobs done can be quite useful in understanding what criteria technologies will be judged against, at least in the shorter term, right? And as you said, Jan, I mean, customers will gravitate, and I believe this, toward the product, the solution that gets the job done the best. All else being equal, all else is never equal. Anyway, this gets complicated real fast. But all else being equal, they will gravitate to the solution that accomplishes the job the best. So if you study a job and you understand the outcomes or error statements, however you word it, those criteria that they're going to use to evaluate how well the job's done, now you have some objective information to evaluate technologies. But again, it's hard to know, or I think it's still unknowable, how other technologies are going to overlay and multiply times each other. And the thing that's pain today, it might not be a pain a year from now. So it's all emotion. So it's helpful, but it's not going to answer that question of what AI is going to do.
So I think there is, so a lot of what you're doing is making a lot of distinctions, and philosophy is, I don't know, 80% making distinctions. And I think you made a distinction there that's really important, that if I'm confronted with that question, I answer in this way. So there is a question about the emergence of technology. Like, where does AI come from? And I don't think Jobs Done has anything to say about this. Just nobody knows. I mean, go back 3 years or 2 years or even less, nobody would have predicted the way AI, okay, maybe there are a few nerds here and there, but in general, we wouldn't have known. Nobody would have known. And you cannot predict the emergence of new technology. That's kind of a different field altogether, and it happens. But then there is a second aspect, and that's the, again, going back to the way I view it, it's the adoption of technology. I think what very often, and that Jobs to be Done tells you, is very often we implicitly, without realizing it, make the assumption that great new technology will lead to adoption. And I just don't think that's true. Unfortunately, that is not true. I think it's the other way around. It's kind of adoption that drives technology. And their Jobs to be Done has something to say. So whatever new tech is coming out and whatever new tech is being put on the market, Jobs to be Done gives you at least a way to evaluate the probability of it sticking in the market or not. If you would really do a bit, really go deep on understanding what the job, for example, is. I think AI is a beautiful case where you can see, well, hey, somehow this changes how we search for information or how we find answers online. At least that's the behavior it changed for me. I'm much more likely now to go to ChatGPT and all that kind of stuff than to go to Google. So the job, answering a question or get an answer to a question, is something that's just done better, or some of the questions is done better with AI now than with Google. So there is this aspect of saying, hey, what are kind of the fields of adoption? Now, this sounds in theory very easy. In practice, this is very, very difficult to actually do, kind of go from technology to the job. But I think there is something to say. But you're absolutely right. I think about the question of what technology will there be in 5 years, Jobs Done has nothing, I think nothing to add, nothing to say.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say nothing, because at least it gives you the right, at least it gives you the right questions.
Yeah.
At least for finding information, or getting the answer to a question. You can say this, and this is a little bit of a circular argument maybe, but the solution that will best help you to get the answer to the question. I mean, so at least you sort of have, if you're Sherlock Holmes, you have some clues, like you have something, but it's not everything, and it's not, I don't even know how much is, but it's at least it's something. But you made a great point that I want to comment on. Otherwise, we'll get on to something else and I'll forget. You said, see if I can word it correctly. You said it's not that the better solution drives adoption, but it's adoption drives the technology.
Yeah.
And the example that you made me think about a while ago, I said, the market will adopt the best solution, all things being equal.
Yeah.
So here's a case where all things were not equal. The back in the 70s, when Sony came out with Betamax, this is sort of a famous story, right? And Matsushita came out with VHS, and the Sony, I'm not going to know all the details, but it was superior. I think the tapes were smaller. That's a better attribute. And the video image, I think, was crisper, but it was technically superior to VHS. But Sony said, we're going to lock it down. It's very proprietary, as opposed to their technology. So only Sony could make Sony machines. Only Sony could make or license the tapes. Where Matsushita they said, we're going to license the technology. We'll make it, but anybody can make it. And so the adoption of VHS style just exploded against so it won versus a quote superior technology. Yeah. But again, it's because all else wasn't equal. It was because the marketing was Sony lost a marketing war with a superior product. So in that case, I mean, exactly what you said, adoption drove the technology, but that doesn't mean the Matsushita's engineers did a better job. Actually, Sony's engineers did a better job. Yeah. The fact that they did a better job with that technology is not a negative. It just wasn't enough, right? Yes. I mean, at that point in time, if Sony had pursued that same strategy, then they would have beaten VHS. If that makes sense. So it's like both things are true at once. It's still better to have a solution that helps you do the job better. That's still better. But then there's other things in play as far as who actually wins.
But here's the thing. I think here's the beautiful thing that you kind of had these two. You mentioned these two things that are moving all the time, and I think kind of technical superiority and superiority in terms of getting the job done is not necessarily the same. And I think that is the key insight. So the pure technical superiority is not necessarily connected. There is no direct line to it being better at getting the job done. Now, if everything being equal, a superior technological product is very much likely to get the job done better. But that's not always the case. So it doesn't always make sense to go after a technologically more superior product if all else isn't equal, which usually is the case. I mean,
and one of the outcomes is certainly just the cost, right? Yeah. And so when somebody's comparing VHS to Betamax machine, that's one. We usually don't talk about cost as much, but it's sort of important, isn't it? And so when people were comparing those two, they weren't comparing, they're evaluating which matters more to me, this cheaper machine with a bigger cassette or this expensive machine and it's a little bit smaller. I'll pay. But they would have still, they still would have preferred the smaller one, but it just couldn't outweigh the network effects that they gained. And so the reason I like spinning through this is sometimes people will dismiss the fact that it was a better product. But that was still a point in Sony's favor. The fact that they didn't capitalize on it would not have helped them to have a worse product, right? In fact, that's probably the only reason we have this. The only reason we're talking about something from 45 years ago is it's an example of where the better product didn't win. That's the only reason it's an interesting story.
Yeah, exactly.
So there is something that you touched upon, like how do kind of humans evaluate solutions, and I think Jonathan does have kind of a claim about this, and maybe it's good that we jump into that topic. So in kind of more this. Yeah. What kind of anthropological? Well, there's going to be a couple of words that I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing, but anthropological is one. So, kind of what it states about being a human being in a certain sense. And I think the first claim that I made, or the first sentence that I read, was human beings want to achieve certain things, call these things a job. And that's so. There is a long tradition of philosophical anthropology, which is nothing else than asking the question in a philosophical way, whatever that means. That's a separate discussion I'm not going to have. But asking in a philosophical sense the question of what it is to be human. So, or what is a human being, or what kind of defines a human being. So, if you want to go deeper into that, it's philosophical anthropology. It's everywhere, and there is different 1,000 different strands, but that's kind of where you want to go to. So, and I think what Jobs to be done says, there is this claim that humans are in a certain sense purpose driven. They go after goals. They kind of arrange their behavior in terms of wanting to achieve stuff. So in the broadest sense, and all I want to do as a kind of a discussion starter is pick a little bit on a couple of points from philosophy that kind of make a pro argument about this, and maybe as how would you counter this? How would you critique that idea? And I think we see both also in the innovation world. So on the pro side, I think there is starting with the Greeks and even before, probably there's a long tradition in philosophy to define or even think of human beings as, or what it means to be human is to be a rational creature. So in comparison to animals, for example, we have something more, which is our reason or ability to reason, or language, and the language and reasoning go together. So we are rational creatures. And for the purposes here, I think rationality, I mean, that in itself is a debate what it really is and what does it mean to be a rational human and how to act rationally. But I think for us, we can just say, okay, it's kind of rationality has to do with the ability to choose the right means to achieve a goal. So you would say somebody is irrational if, for example, they say, well, at the moment it's hot in Switzerland, I feel hot. Then they jump into the lake. That you would say, okay, that's a rational way of cooling down. However, if you say somebody says I'm feeling hot, and they would start picking out, I don't know, a heater and stand in front of it, you would doubt, like, they're not, so I want to cool down, but I'm going into the sauna, for example. So there is something off about the relationship between what they want to achieve and the way they want to achieve it. And that the second one is probably what we would call irrational behavior. It doesn't make sense, right? So I think in a sense, Jobs to be done does start with, or has that claim in it, where it says, well, human beings are rational. There is a rational part to human beings, and it's exactly that relationship between kind of the things they choose to achieve, the goals, and that somehow falls in line.
So what I would comment on that is the fact that I think one thing that's often overlooked, and including, I would argue, in Jobs to be done, is how people actually choose the goals. So is
nice.
That in philosophy, is that part of the rationality discussion? So the fact that people are actually choosing the goals and how they do that.
Okay, so here I'm going to chicken out a little bit, because that's a huge debate. But the one standard answer to this could be the difference between being irrational and being reasonable. Now, being irrational means, just as at least the way I define it, is having a meaningful relationship between the goals and the means, a sensible relationship between the goals and the means. So, for example, if you want to say, well, I'm an alcoholic, or I really want to get wasted, then you could say drinking a lot of beer is a rational way to pursue the goal. It doesn't it doesn't say anything about the goal. The goal is the goal. It's just about the relationship between the means and the ends, if you want. Now, being reasonable is a different thing. There you can ask the question, is it reasonable to have the desire to get drunk? Now, that's a different story. So there is very often this debate, at least that's more in the kind of political philosophy, where they're asking the question of a difference between rationality and being reasonable. For example, you could say, well, in Switzerland, there's a lot of public transportation, for example, and it's not 100% controlled. So it's not all the time that they test, if they check if you have a ticket or not. So in terms of rationality, if you just look at it from a purely rational point of view, if there is such a thing, it would make sense to not buy a ticket most of the time, right? Because the probability that you get caught is smaller. So the fine that you will have to pay is probably smaller if you travel a lot. So you see what I mean? But is that reasonable? So there is another way of kind of being rational in brackets, which usually in philosophy is called being reasonable, where you would argue in a different way and say, hey, not paying for a ticket kind of destroys the ability in the future to even take public transportation. Public transportation relies as a system on people paying their tickets, even if they're not checked all the time. So there is these two different things, and I think jobs to be done is stronger on the rational side. I don't think that there is any kind of evaluation of the goals itself, or a kind of a getting a sugar rush or a nicotine hit. That's a goal that you want to achieve, and there's means to get there. I don't think there is any kind of stance on this, and there are goals, and a lot of the goals that people pursue are not reasonable. So.
But does reasonableness reduce to rationality, and does that bring us back to this hierarchy of jobs and goals that people talk a lot about? So you don't believe we can reduce reasonableness to rationality? I mean, if you look higher, so for public transportation, I might have a goal to maintain a good public transport system, and then I have a conflict.
It's up for debate. If you're interested in that kind of question, and especially somebody who would strongly argue for that connection, that reasonableness reduces to rationality, would be Immanuel Kant. So deontological philosophy, if you like. So they would say that, and Kant tries to do this, put these two things together, so that a purely rational human being would also be the kind of a morally superior, that's always the morally better choice to go. In recent years, or well, even before, it's just heavily debated. But somebody who would believe that rationality or reasonableness reduces to rationality, that would be Kant. I myself have strong doubts, but that's where you would want to go to. That's a whole different debate.
Because what I find quite interesting also is that somehow for me, reasonableness connects to more values and ethics, and then rationality, as you mentioned, does not say anything about the ethical value of the particular goal you're going for. And there's this, I'm not at all a philosopher, but this is one of the like buzz sentences that I've heard before, is this idea that, you oughts and wants are not the same. And so here, basically, this is what we're saying then, if I understand correctly, that what you ought to do cannot reduce to what you want to do.
I mean, okay. So here's my view on this. I think you can see this in the behavior of human beings. I mean, look at sustainability. I think it's fair to say that it's rather rational to be sustainable. Probably, I don't know. Is it reasonable? There's a whole different debate. But I think in the behaviors, you can just see that sometimes we consciously, willingly, knowingly go against rational reasons. At least I do. So I don't know. I used to smoke, and I don't smoke anymore. So that was probably a rational decision to quit. But I used to do it, and I used to like it. That's just and it was not a question of knowing whether it is rational to smoke. I knew that this is not a very smart thing to do. So anyway, but that's a whole different debate, and I think some people believe that they're the same thing. So you can reduce reasonableness to rationality. Most, I would say, now don't believe this, but who am I to say? So I don't know.
I saw a Twitter poll just over the weekend, had thousands of votes. It said, "Are people rational or irrational?" I voted for rational. In this, with thousands of votes, I said rational, I said rational. In thousands of votes, I was part of the 3% that voted for rational. 97% voted irrational. And certainly in the early days of philosophy, it was sort of assumed people were rational, goal seeking. But today, in my opinion, without any logical case that I've ever heard, people just assume customers are irrational, and also that they make decisions with emotion. Now we're conflating a couple of things, so I don't want to get into that quite.
No, but that's good. I think that's exactly the critique probably that many also bring against jobs to be done.
But let's go back
irrationality of people. Yeah, sorry.
As you guys know, and one of my chapters is the rational customer. And if somebody will make a case to me that people are irrational, I'm all ears. I've yet to hear it. But let's go to your smoking example. And I was curious about your definition of rationality, so I sort of scribbled it down. A sensible relationship. Ability to choose the right means to achieve a goal is what I wrote down. Yeah. So so somebody would have looked at the former Jan and said, watch you smoking a cigarette and go, wow, what an irrational decision. But let me ask you a question. Why were you smoking?
Okay. Now, I think
it doesn't have to be the reason.
Just feeling. No.
Couple reasons.
The feeling it gave me. So the nicotine rush. That's a beautiful
nicotine rush. Enjoyment for nicotine.
Weirdly enough, the taste.
Enjoy the taste.
I would say the same thing, but the taste.
Yeah.
Kind of the socializing aspect.
Social.
What else?
Actually, we're good right there.
Look cool.
You just described just in 4 seconds. You described 3 goals that it helped you to achieve. You made a rational decision to choose that cigarette to achieve 3 goals, and we could probably go on the nicotine. How did that help you? And social. I mean, that's like one of the in the hierarchy of needs. Social belonging, the ability to belong to a tribe. That's a completely, by my crazy way of thinking, a completely rational decision to choose the cigarette to achieve those goals.
Yeah.
So when in every example I've ever heard where somebody makes the case where people are irrational, the flaw they make is they apply their own judgment system to another person.
Yeah.
And they say, well, I want to live to be, I want to see my grandchildren. I want to go to my grandchildren's wedding. So I wouldn't smoke. But guess what? They just described their goal.
Yeah.
They described their goal. And so the definition of rationality way back to my economics class was described. I like your definition better, by the way, but I remember it. It was like people respond to incentives. But actually, I think your definition. So, which is to say, you avoid pain and you go toward pleasure.
Yeah.
I mean, the example I use a lot, the cigarettes is a great one, but also a donut. I mean, if I eat a donut right now, I made that decision for a reason. It might not be, other people might, even I might have conflicting goals, but the point is it helped me to accomplish something.
Yes.
Now, Dan Ariely, do you guys know Dan Ariely?
Yes.
Yeah.
Got his book here. What's it?
He's a brilliant guy. And so I'm always, even as I'm stammering my words, just as I do now when I describe his work, because I learned a ton from it. Man, he's a super guy, did great research, but his book's called Predictably Irrational. So I read all of his studies and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And it's like, we're like if we were like in the classroom together, we're like, yeah, that's awesome. And then he would say, therefore they're irrational. And I'm like, whoa, hold on.
Yeah,
I agree
that's
with
one
you
step too far.
until your conclusion. Now, one of the examples was it had to do with chocolates, and you had 1 cent Hershey's chocolate, and you had 15. I'm gonna come back to that one. Sorry. One of the examples was about tickets to a basketball game, and it's like the ticket. I'm gonna have the numbers off, so just order of magnitude.
Whatever.
Right. So it's like the tickets cost $200. Okay, but if you gave somebody a ticket, then they would not sell it for any less than like $2,000. And he says, therefore I pronounce them irrational. But he's sort of overlooking, like, once I have something, it's like, what jobs does this help me to accomplish? What about the enjoyment that I won something? That's like, and so now if I'm just buying the ticket, I'm purchasing the right to go sit in a seat and watch a basketball game. But now that I've won something, there's like that's accomplishing additional things. And I'm like,
goal,
wow, this is so cool. Now I'm going to enjoy my prize. And yet, so I place a higher value on getting rid of that winning than just to attend. So to me, it was amazing research and then it's like he lost it like he missed the great conclusion. Now his book is called Predictably Irrationally, so maybe it wanted to prove that. The other example that I was going into was Hershey's chocolate. You guys are in Switzerland, so it's Hershey's on one side. I think it was Lindt on the other side, and it's like it looked at, would you buy a 1 cent Hershey's Kiss or a 15-cent Lindt chocolate? Okay, and then it was like 70% would pay 15 cents for the Lindt, whatever, 30% for the 1 cent chocolate. And then he reduced them both by a penny. So now the Hershey's is free and the Lindt is 14 cents. And reality would say, well, see, we just reduced it by one. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot the conclusion. But then the preferences switch. So now 70% are taking the free Hershey's.
Yeah.
And then reality says, see, there people are irrational. Once again, we reduced it by just 1 cent, the same amount for either chocolate. Now by that same, now they flipped. And I'm like, that's one way, but one thing went to free. You reduced it, 100%. The other one went down 7%. The other one went down 100%. And so free sort of has if you think of a value as benefits over price, well, for something that's free, value sort of goes to infinity.
Yeah. And
so I felt like it was, so it's just study after, you got all these studies on there. Each are like super interesting, but none of them convinced me that people are irrational. And so what's so interesting about this is how in business and in whatever, this people are irrational is just so accepted.
It's very strong.
Yeah. And I've yet to hear, I'm still listening. I'm still open to it. But every time they make the most common error, it's they assign their own with a cigarette with you, Jan. Yeah. Like if I were to judge you on that, I'm taking my value system and evaluating you on that. Yeah. Jobs to be done, it gets you out of that predicament, right? Because your opinion doesn't matter. It's only customers. And then the other one is just sort of this, with the tickets, it's just not taking everything into account. Like this benefit of I won something, it's dismissing that as value, or reducing the price of one thing 100% versus 7%. It's just sort of, so it's a sort of a simplistic simplistic, just with the predetermined, we already know that we're going to show people are irrational. So we're going to run a bunch of studies and we're going to conclude. I really feel terrible saying this because I loved the book. I absolutely loved his thinking. He's a brilliant guy. Yeah. We agree on like up to his conclusions. And then I'm like, I disagree.
There's one thing I want to just quickly elaborate on. Sorry, because I think the philosophical point behind it is worth spreading, and I think that is very often an error, or a confusion that is around. And you said this, there is kind of applying your own system of values to somebody else.
Yeah.
And for me, kind of the philosophical error behind it, I'm trying to make this as clear as I can, is it's a very different thing to think of rationality as a behavior of people and calling people rational or irrational. And that's what I tried to do. So kind of defining rationality as a relationship between means and ends, basically. Things you want to achieve and things that get you there.
Right.
Then you start talking about as a behavior. Do people behave rationally or not? There, I think people, yes, strongly rational. Now, there is very often a mistake of confusing this kind of understanding of rationality with is believing the statement X to be true rational or not. So, for example, I don't know, let's take something, I hope not too controversial. The Earth is flat. Let's assume we all agree that the Earth isn't flat, but it's round, more or less. So there are people that would say believing the statement the Earth is flat to be true is irrational. Now, but go back a couple of hundreds of years, and people had great reasons that made them believe that the Earth is flat. You mentioned the sun going up and down. So the sun kind of moving along the horizon is if you don't know the rest of it, is evidence for it that the Earth doesn't move. It's direct, sensible evidence that the Earth doesn't move. So if you just have that kind of information available to you, it would be very irrational to conclude that the Earth is moving and the sun stays still. So if you don't know let's go back 1,000 years into, or more than that. Greeks already knew that that wasn't the case. But so if you don't have other information available, it would be quite irrational looking at the sun to think that the Earth moves and the sun stays still, just based on that knowledge. Now we have much more knowledge, so we come to a different conclusion. So, and I think these two get very often confused. Today, we very often say, and that's probably where Dan also goes, is believing certain statements to be true or false is linked to being rational or not. And that's where you get all these different debates also in the political sphere, where somebody else believes a different kind of thing to be true, and you call them irrational. But maybe based on the evidence that they have, the knowledge that they have, they came to a different conclusion, which could be an outcome of a rational process. And look at, this is okay, I don't want to defend flat earthers, but look at them. Most of them are really trying empirically to find out. So they might come to a different conclusion, but the way they go about this is up to a certain extent, of course, but up to a certain extent, it has similarity to go approaching the problem rationally. So the philosophical distinction behind it is ascribing rationality or thinking about rationality as a kind of behavior, connecting means and ends, or then thinking about rationality in terms of believing things to be true or false. And I think these two things get mixed all the time. So and I'm much more leaning on rationality, trying to define rationality as a way of behaving. And then you end up, I think, with the view that you explained, Scott, so that people in general know very well how to choose their means to get to an end. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but in general, they have that ability. And that's what I would call being rational.
Yeah, I think if it would, to me, when I say rational, I'm totally talking about the behavior. I see what you mean about the belief. Even if it's the same word, to me, those are completely different concepts, even if they're the same word.
Yeah.
I tell you, just sort of because really somebody is saying, I'm taking the knowledge that I have and I'm coming to a conclusion. Somebody else is saying, well, I'm taking the knowledge I have and your conclusion's wrong. So they could both be staring at each other, accusing each other of being, quote, irrational, but it's a completely different meaning of this behavioral thing. A little fun thing, if you want to go down a little rabbit hole, is there's a group of people that, say the moon landing was fake. Yeah. And, it really sounds funny, but read some of the things they say. They actually have some very it's not, they have some very, it's like you laugh at it when the more now I'm going to all of a sudden disappear, get taken out by the CIA or something. But when you read about it, it's like, they have very compelling, I put evidence in quotes, for their case. And that's the information they have. And my goodness, over the last, so this, with coming out of the pandemic, things
changed,
that were true, all of a sudden that you couldn't even pontificate about something not being true. You couldn't even suggest something wasn't. So there was debate was squashed. So the trust was very low, and the trust of information was very low. So naturally, people are going to have very different opinions. But to me, that's just a completely different.
Yeah,
it's like it almost should be another word.
Yeah. It's about knowledge. It's about facts, and it's. I think what I also wanted to touch upon is on the rationality in the economic sense. A lot of this work has been done where basically you're looking at different different bets you can do. So you have two choices. You've got a 30% chance of winning 100 francs or $100, and you have a 50% chance of losing this much. Which option do you choose? And that's a very specific kind of situation also that I don't think we encounter much in real life. And a lot of these, including the work that Kahneman and co have done on this kind of stuff, is often relating to these kind of choices. So I think we wanted to talk about that also in terms of the amount of knowledge we have.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to point out is that some of these quote unquote irrational behaviors are due to some evolutionary developments that in humans. So, for example, the well-known cost aversion is not that irrational, because if you lose, you can only die once, right? I mean, so if you die, it's finished. So it's normal that you would weigh more, put more weight on losing than on winning, for instance. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the definition of the word rational, and I think a lot of people don't use the same definitions necessarily. I think there's also an interesting thing relating to long-term and short-term objectives. So if we go back to the smoking example, I think the people will often say, okay, long-term is more reasonable, but you're basically comparing two very different things. You're comparing a long-term goal and a short-term goal, and this comes down to each and everyone's individual values and what they want to put forward.
I just want to kind of put out or highlight one thing that you said, because that gets you down a completely different rabbit hole that we shouldn't. But usually there is this association between being irrational as being good for you and being irrational as being bad for you.
Yeah.
Now that's a very ingrained belief, or in general.
Right.
Now, if you want to have those things confused for you, and I encourage you to do so, read some Nietzsche. So you will see about the purpose of irrationality, or really the advantage of irrationality, even compared to being rational. But I think you're exactly right. So there is this attachment of rationality as being something good, and there is an argument to be made that irrationality in certain circumstances is a good thing for you, even kind of helps you shortcut an otherwise extremely complicated process that you wouldn't be able to see through in a rational way. Okay, sorry, go on.
No, I was also thinking, when you were discussing these different situations where people might be irrational, I wondered what you guys were thinking about. I think it was in the book Nudge, or it could have also been in Dan Ariely's book. I don't remember exactly, but there was this idea of the menu and having different kinds of prices, and it's this notion of framing, and how you, depending on how you frame something, people will make different decisions. So there was, if I remember correctly, this menu, they had some mopeds, scooters or motorbikes, small motorbikes that were on the pizza menu, that were worth of course much more than the other items on the menu. And what they realized is people were actually more willing to buy more expensive stuff because the frame had been put higher. So that it's true. It's hard to just completely put that aside and not see this as some form of irrational behavior, but there's probably some hacking of some kind of evolutionary behavior that we developed over time to cope. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about that example, for example?
You remind me of another. It's almost, I think, if you list out all the, like if there were attorneys fighting it out, and there's a group of attorneys making the case for irrationality, I think there's a finite list of their arguments. And you mentioned another one of them, Jonathan, which is like, people buying in the US, I don't know if you guys have this in Europe. We have lottery tickets where people but sponsored by the what's weird, like there's all this, be careful about gambling, sports gambling's bad, but the government will sell you lottery tickets, which is like also gambling.
It's free taxes, right?
Yeah. So yeah. And so the point is, well, wow, all these poor people, especially, so that's really the shame of it. It's a lot of shame of it, but one of the shames of it is it tends to, the poorest people that can least afford it tend to be the ones that buy these lottery tickets. And it's just, you can't ascribe to rationality what is just bad at math. Like they're making an incorrect, because if you just look at a lottery commercial, are they giving you good information to make a financial decision? No. It's like, you can't win if you don't play. Here's John, here's Francis, here's this person, here's all these lottery winners, how it changed their life. It's a deceptive advertisement, making the cost to confuse people on the idea of cost benefit of this purchase. And so this person is, in my mind, rationally using this information that has not been presented fairly. So they're bad at math, and so they make an incorrect decision that actually would not be in line with their goals. Their goals presumably to increase their wealth, but that they think they're making a decision to increase their wealth because they've been fooled, and because they're not good at math. Or
they might just like the kick of
that. That's right. So there's a completely separate thing where they might just like, for the group, it's like, it's just a game I'm playing. So like people go to Vegas, or and they'll say, all right, I'm gonna take $200, and when that $200 is gone, it's gone, but I'm buying $200 worth of entertainment. Now that's a pretty advanced way of thinking, because in that case somebody they're self-aware enough to know that they might start making these bad decisions because it's so enticing, but they're putting a constraint to keep them from getting in trouble, because they know the environment is all going to be, everything's going to be against them. Like they're going to be feeding them free drinks,
Yeah.
But yes, so I think the people who are bad at math, and then we look at their assessment and say, look, they made and then conclude they're irrational. No, they thought that $10 raffle ticket or lottery ticket, had, in whatever kind of equation, whatever their logic was, had a value. They thought they were buying something that was worth more than $10. And honestly, if they lose, the $10 is gone. But if they were to win and they don't ever have to work again, and that's a pretty, and they, are just have wealth beyond their wildest dreams. So, and that's how it's presented. So that's another in the category of what is called irrational, but it's just a poor risk assessment.
I used to say this as a joke. I used to say, well, you buy a lottery ticket and the chances are 50-50. You either win or lose. Right. So, but that's different. That's different thing.
But the other thing I would want to comment on is that a lot of these bets or these situations, they are put in monetary or utilitarian terms, and I'm not sure a lot of our experiences and how we make decisions are necessarily in those terms. So in economics, you always have to convert somehow whatever the benefit is that you're getting into some kind of monetary or utilitarian value. And it's not so clear to me that this is actually how people measure value. And in that case, does that mean that they are irrational? I mean, is it rational? Does rational mean that you have to measure everything in a kind of quantitative way like this? I don't know, but I think a lot of people would disagree with that proposition.
Yeah, but I think there is a beautiful distinction here between values and the values of values, right? So things that you want to achieve and the value you attach to those things. And that's probably a different story. So maybe it's not a good idea. So that's this question between pursuing certain goals and prioritizing within the goals. And I think these are two very different things. So that's not an answer. That's just saying where the problem lies.
I'm glad you stopped smoking, Jan. I think that was a very rational decision.
That was a very rational. Well, I can tell you. So one of the biggest drivers of that was actually my wife. She smoked as well from time to time, not as much as I did, and she tried to quit. And I knew that if I would continue, she would start smoking again. So at least I believe that's there's a little bit of rationality in there. Now, what one could say and one reproach that one could make to Jobs to be done, I think, and I would be interested in your review, is that, well, okay, but that's a post-rationalization, right? So I behaved in whatever kind of way, and I just behaved nilly-willy or whatever, and I quit smoking. Or I was driven by emotions. I love my wife. That's why I would do everything. So jump off a cliff, whatever. And in hindsight, I describe my behavior as, of course, a rational kind of chain of events. I think that there is maybe something in there. So would you see that kind of, yes, that is a challenge to Jobs to be done, that people tend to kind of post-rationalize, that they kind of are bad at describing their own behavior, or do you trust kind of their reasoning in when they explain how they go about things or how they went about things?
I don't think it would damage my definition of rationality, but I think it's just another factor that how well can we trust our memories if we're using ourselves as an N of one? I honestly don't know, because I would have to have somebody in parallel to be taking. Who's going to challenge me on my memories? Like, who knows better? But I could be wrong. But I don't know. I mean, but as you described that situation, one of the things that occurred to me is, well, certainly I would believe you exactly what you said, is that you wanted your wife to quit for the best of reasons, and so you wanted to support her in that. But also, I wondered if, as a goal yourself, you wanted to quit, and you saw this as an opportunity, as a catalyst where you two would sort of be able to support each other. Yeah. And it's like, even for yourself, this gives, it's like, if you quit at the same time, you also have a little better chance to stick. You both have a better chance to stick with it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I used to enjoy it a lot, so I really felt the negative effects of it. So. All right. So, hey, we'll continue our discussion next time. I think we're going to stick around a little bit more and just go on and talk about philosophy, and enjoy that episode next week. I mean, we've been talking now for an hour 15 about the first point of my notes about rationality and how that links to judgment. So maybe this is kind of a good thing to make some kind of a cut.